So my focus is on East Africa, and I don't mean to insult anyone, but Africa is a large continent and sometimes East Africa is defined in different ways. So all of the highlighted colors are actually considered East Africa. So Mozambique all the way to Egypt, but typically when we say East Africa, we mean Kenya and Tanzania, Uganda and Rwanda. So my study focused on Ugandan youth. However, East Africans represent more than a quarter of the immigrants in the US. So they're a representative population as well. Los Angeles is the fourth highest concentration of African immigrants after New York, DC, and Atlanta. So the specific aims of my study, given that it was a relatively unexamined population, were to just look at the youth perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes towards health and self-development. I wanted to describe the resources and barriers that youth were encountering after they had immigrated and look at a model of factors across social contexts. So what's going on in the school versus the home versus their family and the wider community. The participants I recruited were all English speaking. Uganda is the national language is English, so that was something that facilitated the research, which was great. I looked at just females. I hoped to recruit from 11 to 24, and I ended up with 16 to 25. So the younger ones were not able, I could not recruit. It was a pretty significant challenge, actually, and a lot of it had to do with building trust in the community and with the young people and the parents being kind of questionable of why I wanted to work with the younger ones. And the few that I did interact with in the community events and the observations were really just, I mean, developmentally appropriate, but really concrete. Yes, no. Yes, no. So I think the interviews with the older one ended up being a little bit richer anyhow. And the time since immigration was 6 months to 11 years. So we were really specific about the 6 months one because we wanted them to have had some time to have some experiences in the US, start to feel the effects of immigration as opposed to like catching them right when they got here. So my research, the data collection methods were community observation. I did over 100 hours in the community. There's a really substantial Ugandan community in the Valley area of Los Angeles, so that's where I had my first touch interactions and going to their weekly meetings and the different community events. And I did formal interviews and informal discussions as well. The research methodology I use, which I won't go into too much, is grounded theory. It's a type of qualitative methodology, specifically dimensional analysis. So dimensional analysis is one way of looking at a whole picture and trying to isolate what exactly is going on here, what's the main process, and what's sort of supporting the process, facilitating it, blocking it, and what are the consequences of it. So at the end, you kind of end up with a grid-like set of information. And for my dissertation, I basically wrote a paper or a chapter on each column. So the main process was identity development, the main thing that was happening with the 16 to 25-year-olds. And I'm going to talk it more in depth, but just to explain the context are the things, the setting in which this process was happening, the conditions are the things that are facilitating or blocking the process, and then there's the consequences. So actually today I'll go in depth on the conditions, but I'll briefly touch on the others. So the contextual factors were the US-specific discourses on immigration, race, and gender. So like these young people didn't just arrive here blank slate. Like we have a whole discourse and opinions and legislation, all kinds of things going on with both gender, race, and immigration. So this was not a blank slate. They walked into a boiling pot and had their experiences. Also the purpose of their immigration, the majority of them came through I didn't ask, but the majority disclosed that they came through the diversity visa, which is something you can apply for in countries, and there's a certain amount of spots allotted, and so most of them came through that channel. So that would be different than like running from war crimes or being a refugee or something else. Demographic characteristics, so just how old they were, whether or not they had completed X amount of school, that type of thing. Their family structure, some of them came on their own, but the majority came either with their family or with a portion of their family to join another portion, but that ended up being important. Their normative cultural understandings, so these are adolescents who have already started developing in their own home, in their own context, in their own country, so kind of what they were walking in with, their development per se at the time of immigration, and their developmental understandings of identity specifically. So the process of identity development that I really am talking about is this: who am I, where do I fit, What am I and what am I not? And why does it matter? These were questions that, this was not the focus of my interviews, this was not what I brought up, this is just what came out regardless. And the consequences were really altered gender roles and expectations and understanding of a gender identity. Differed quite drastically from what their cultural understanding was in Uganda. For a lot of them, some of their moms were second wives or third wives. Some of them didn't anticipate working on their own or living outside of their family home. Some of them, aspired to be married as opposed to an independent career or something like that. And a lot of them described in great depth the change that happened after they came here and how their ideas changed. Also their racial and ethnic identities. So Uganda is a country that is landlocked, and for the majority of my participants lived in the capital city, Kampala. So even while they were a little more urban and exposed to Western culture than the rest of the country, they were still very sheltered in their sense of, they had said things like, well, I know what race is, but I mean, all my friends are black, I've never encountered anything else, I've never been categorized by my skin color, I've never really thought about it. I know in America, you all have to read Roots, so they said things like, that really kind of specifically showed me some of their racial understandings, and then their experiences once they were here. Again, talking a lot about being discriminated against or being grouped with US-born Black Americans or being just people not knowing what they are and having that be important and them being confused of why is that important? Oh, there's all these other things about me. And, so it was a really interesting area. Also their bicultural and integrated identity. So they talked also a lot, one of the consequences of their identity development was talking about how they balanced their Ugandan and their new American self. So they primarily described like a balance. Some of them called it more like an integration. There's a whole body of literature about how people balance and integrate their identities, and this group seems to be doing it in a pretty healthy way. They describe how they can list. I'm gonna go into that more actually. So my 3 papers, one I did a lit review, one I talked about these conditions that are coming up, and one I did a whole paper on the racial and ethnic identities. And so the conditions that really impacted them were, 1, the timing of their immigration, the context of reception. I'm going to go over these influential people in social settings, the perceived value of cultural maintenance, and opportunities and experiences with prejudice and discrimination. So the timing of immigration, something that was really important to how this identity process development played out was the age and stage they were at when they immigrated. So they told very different stories if they came when they were 11 versus if they came when they were 22. That's kind of like an obvious, yeah, but it really was quite important, and they had a lot of thoughts about the other kids. Oh, people that were younger, it was like this. They're gonna lose themselves. Oh, people that are older, they're isolated. They only like Ugandans. They never even gave America a chance. So there was a lot of his and her, they and them. And so the timing of immigration was crucial to how well they immigrated. Most of them agreed that they wanted to be old enough. The ideal would be to immigrate when you're old enough to still have your roots, but be young enough to enter the schooling system, meaning high school, not college, high school, because they felt that the resources in high school were what helped you get into college. And you needed to go to high school to get the guidance counselor, to get the good grades, to get the intel of where to go and how to apply for a scholarship, which was really interesting, and I hadn't seen anything about that in the literature. For example, one of the young women said she came when she was younger. So she said, for me, it's tough. I was raised in one culture, but I grew up in another. I had grown up to love and live with American culture and know the American culture more than I knew the Ugandan culture. Within the Ugandan community, it's hard because I'm seen as an outsider. I'm seen as an American rather than a Ugandan. So they described in depth about, even within their own community, kind of how polarizing it was of when you arrived. The context of reception refers to the group or the place that someone comes into. So for example, there were a lot of preconceived notions about what it meant to be African in America. For a lot of them, they felt like it was a great thing. Like, oh, people think that Africans are like the best kind of immigrants. They work hard, they're educated, they come as a family, they're really a great bunch. So they thought that was really important and excellent. Los Angeles was specifically a good context of reception for them, good and bad, because it had an established Ugandan community, which is really important for immigrant groups, whether or not there's an established group or not. And then just distinct aspects of the US as a host country. So that kind of refers more to that immigration discourse that we had talked about. Influential people in social settings that impacted their identity development were the Ugandan community and the elders and parents, all of which who had a lot of opinions about how they should raise and develop themselves and also weren't very shy about them. The school setting, their own expectations for what they wanted to become, and then also the media. So they talked a lot about how they had a lot of ideas of what the US would be like before they came, and it was, you know, the house with the picket fence and everybody being a millionaire, and how their actual experiences were really different. And it was very hard to maintain their relationships back at home and tell their friends and family back at home, this is what I'm actually dealing with. And most of the time folks at home didn't identify or understand that. They would say, Maria made a quote referring to the elders, they know how to guide me to the right path. If they see you, everyone in the community is like your family. If they see you doing something wrong, they tell you, oh, you should do this, and of course, you do it. So girls of all age really said, you know, they followed the elders. Cultural maintenance versus adoption of new traits. This just refers more to them talking about this, how much do they want to maintain their roots versus how much do they want to absorb of the American culture. They'd say, I have Ugandan things I like to keep, some which I don't. I pick up behaviors from here too. So a lot of them gave me these lovely lists. These are the Ugandan traits that are really valuable. These are the really good ones. These are the American traits that I really love. I thought it was interesting because that talks about being independent, being assertive, being conscious about health. They all mentioned health, even though I didn't directly ask about it. I think they thought because I was a nurse, they should tell me about their exercise habits. And they're like, oh, I eat so badly now that I'm here, nothing is fresh. But also about their Ugandan traits, saying you know, we have a better respect for our family and for God, and you know, we're more conservative and more respectful, and these are all really important attributes of my Ugandan culture that I want to keep, that I want to pass along, and that I think are important. Experiences of prejudice. It was just important when they talked about their identity development, their various experiences with race, with class, and with gender. One woman kind of combined all of them, and she said, being uneducated and also an immigrant, also someone of color, are three things that aren't really going in your favor in the US. So you want to at least be on the same level in a sense, and I think the one thing that you can help, you're never going to be in the same playing field as, say, a white person, but at the same time you can try. So the closer you are, the better. And I feel like you can do that with an education. So she was really talking about, I can't change my gender, I can't change my class status, I can't change my immigration status, but I can really be a good student. So for her, this was propelling her through college. And she really sought out, she was attending UCI, UC Irvine, really great school, really working hard, had made education become her identity. And so the implications are that these young people are doing this cultural balance, all the while they're doing decision making. So they're really deciding, who am I going to be? What am I going to choose? How am I going to do this? They're going through a very specific racialization process and experiences, and if anyone wants to hear more about that, I do have my other paper that details that in great detail. And then also the mental health implications. So, you know, a lot of focus is put on immigrants and on immigrant youth specifically and their mental health, but a lot of it is focus on risk and you know, what are the risk factors going on with this group, and a lot of it is about promoting positive mental health with this group. They have a great community that they come from, they have a great community they're coming into, so a lot of it is about resilience and about helping them maintain and continue to develop their ethnic identity in this new place. And so that was one of the implications I discussed greatly, was about promoting some of these positive things that are already in the community and trying to not just look at the risks. The next steps, which is what my original dissertation I thought it was going to be about, was about how all of these perceptions and beliefs actually impact their health behaviors. And so that would be the next steps for me. And as she said, I'm starting my dissertation in July, and so I'm not specifically only working with Ugandan immigrants, but African immigrant youth in the school systems. So that's what's next for me. Thank you. I didn't know if anyone had any questions, and this is just to acknowledge my great team, my dissertation team, and really the whole team it takes to get a dissertation done. But that's all. Thank you.
So the youth you're working with now in South Central, are they some of the same youth that participated in your dissertation research?
You know, it's actually not, because primarily they're in the Valley. And so which actually is kind of a relief, because I wasn't sure how that would work out, kind of the crossover, bringing them in for like the second round. But some of them have become friends and, you know, kind of community contacts. And so I continue to bounce ideas off of them. One of them helped me with my proposal for this next program, you know, new questions to ask, that type of thing.
So your postdoc will be at UCLA?
Yes, it's at UCLA. It's the National Clinical Scholars Program, so it's MDs and nurses working together doing clinical research, and I'm based at Kaiser, so part of it is working research in the hospital setting, and then part of it is, you know, learning to play in the sandbox together, MDs and nurses, and then pursuing your own research interests. Yeah. Yes.
I was wondering if you could just talk about what impacts you found that might have been different because of being in LA as opposed to somewhere else in the US. So for example, I was thinking that the kids reporting that they had exercised or like were running and that sort of thing might be because they're living in LA. Like for example, when I first moved to Southern California several years ago from Michigan, I just could not believe how fit everyone was and how everyone was always exercising. So that sort of thing, I'm thinking might be a part of where you're studying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing that people mostly talked about was their shock that they went in a car everywhere, because Los Angeles doesn't have much public transportation, especially not in the Valley. So a lot of them, actually, the first thing they would say is like, oh, I'm usually 10 pounds lighter, but right now I just, you know, it's my winter coat or something like this, talking about they're like trying to find that like natural way to get as much walking back into their life. They did talk about, they didn't talk about it as like everyone's so fit. They talked about it like there's so much pressure here to look good. And more importantly, looking good means something different here. Like in Uganda, looking good means like having some meat on your bones, because it means that you're rich enough to be able to afford food. And then here it's like making sure your bones are showing, that's what looks good. So for them trying to decide like what actually looks good, they were more concerned with like the fact that most people don't eat fresh food, they don't know where to get fresh food, they don't know how to cook with ingredients that are available to them, that type of thing. And so we talked with community leaders about, you know, maybe a little more exposure to things like farmers markets or, you know, group activities that would expose them to some of the fresher ways of life that I like to think exist, even if they're hidden between the McDonald's. But they were pretty focused on how it was too easy to get bad food. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.